"You're on my property, and I'm calling the sheriff!" she screeched, stomping through the woods in fuzzy pink slippers with a chihuahua under one arm and a clipboard in the other. That would have been shocking, if we hadn't been sitting on 1,200 acres of forest that had been in my family's name since 1954. It was like watching a bird yell at an airplane for flying through its sky. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. It had been the perfect plan. A quiet weekend camping trip with my best friend Connor deep in the woods, no phones, no traffic, no nagging bosses, just trees, stars, and the sound of a crackling fire. My grandfather had left me the land in his will a few years ago, but I'd never really done anything with it. Life had gotten busy, and the forest just sat there, undisturbed, quietly waiting for me to remember it existed. But lately, I'd been feeling the itch to disconnect from everything, and when Connor suggested a no-cell signal weekend, I remembered the old property and knew it was time. The first day was everything we hoped it would be. We set up camp by the river bend, grilled steaks on an open flame, and took dips in the ice-cold water like we were kids again. It was the kind of place where time didn't seem to matter. No traffic, no Wi-Fi, just quiet. Peaceful. Until Karen. We first heard her before we saw her, crunching through the underbrush like a wrecking ball in slippers. Connor looked up from his marshmallow just as the dog started barking like it had just spotted a squirrel armed with a bazooka. Then she emerged. Bathrobe, curlers, clutching a laminated HOA manual like it was a holy relic. Her face was locked in a permanent frown, the kind you get from a lifetime of judging people in line at the grocery store. "Who authorized you to camp here?" she demanded. Connor blinked. God. I snorted, but she didn't find it funny. Her eyes snapped to me. "This is protected land. I walk my dog here every morning, and I don't appreciate outsiders trashing it with campfires and whatever this is," she said, waving vaguely at our folding chairs like they were illegal contraband. I calmly stood up, dusted off my jeans, and reached into my backpack for the folded-up deed I always kept on hand. Not because I expected to need it, but because I knew that in the backwoods it's good to be prepared for anything. Bears, rain, or apparently irate slipper-wearing locals. "We're not outsiders," I said, unfolding the paper and holding it out. "My name's Eli. This land's been in my family for 70 years. We own all 1,200 acres. Karen stared at the document like it was written in ancient Egyptian. She didn't even touch it. "That's impossible," she scoffed. "My great-uncle hiked here every Sunday. This trail has been in our community for decades. You can't just claim a forest." Connor leaned in, whispering with a grin, "Pretty sure that's exactly how land ownership works." That only seemed to enrage her more. She turned on her heel, her dog yipping furiously as it bounced in her arm like an angry popcorn kernel. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "You think you can just show up and pretend to own the place? Well, I know people." "I do too," I said, smiling. "Like my lawyer cousin and the county assessor." But she was already storming off into the trees, the slap of her slippers fading with every angry step. We stood there for a second in stunned silence. Then Connor turned back to the fire and said, "So, mores?" We both laughed, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a prickle of unease. Karen wasn't just a busybody. There was something a little too unhinged about her rage, like a shaken soda bottle waiting to explode. And unfortunately for us, she wasn't done yet. The next morning started off normal enough. We made coffee over the fire, skipped rocks on the river, and watched deer wander through the trees like we were in a postcard. It was easy to forget the screeching banshee from the night before. That is, until we heard the low hum of an ATV and saw the flash of neon orange out of the corner of our eyes. Karen returned with reinforcements. Well, if you count a spray can of tree marking paint and a giant binder full of what looked like laminated Google Maps printouts as reinforcements. She drove straight through the clearing like she was a park ranger from a very low-budget movie, hopped off the ATV, and started marking trees with big red XS. "What are you doing?" I asked, stepping forward. Identifying diseased trees for removal, she said without turning around. It's a safety hazard. Pretty sure the only thing diseased is your grasp on reality, Connor muttered under his breath. Karen whirled around and pointed her clipboard at him like it was a weapon. You're going to be fined. This whole setup is illegal. By who? The Society of Angry Forest Ladies. Her face turned a shade of purple that made me think we might need to call for medical attention. But before she could launch into another rant, I walked back to the tent, pulled out my phone, still on airplane mode but loaded with PDFs, and opened the full topographic land survey. The borders were clear. We weren't just camping on my family's property, we were miles deep into it. Karen was the intruder. She refused to look. She stormed off again, this time shouting over her shoulder about bringing the sheriff. Connor looked at me and said, I give her 2 days before she's back with a chainsaw and a goat. I chuckled, but the truth was, it felt like something bigger was coming. Karen wasn't just someone you annoyed once and forgot about. She was the kind of person who turned mild irritation into a vendetta. And if she really believed she had some claim to this land, we were in for one wild weekend. Still, we weren't worried. We had the paperwork, the right, and the marshmallows. What we didn't have was any idea just how far Karen was willing to go. By sunrise, we had new visitors, though not the kind we expected in the middle of a secluded forest. I was pouring hot water into a tin cup of instant coffee when I heard the unmistakable rumble of an engine. Not a truck. Not an ATV this time. A chainsaw. And not the good kind of chainsaw either, like someone responsibly clearing out dead wood. No, this was angry chainsawing. Revenge chainsawing. Karen chainsawing. She came stomping into our clearing like a woman on a mission. No robe this time. Now she was dressed in a bright orange safety vest 2 sizes too small and a neon visor with the words, Volunteer Forest Warden, written in glitter glue across the front. In one hand, she held a clipboard again, this one laminated with color-coded tabs. In the other, she revved the chainsaw like she was starring in her own backwoods action movie. Her dog trailed behind in a rhinestone harness, barking with the determination of a chihuahua that truly believed it was a Doberman. Connor, halfway through a bite of beef jerky, looked over and said, And so it begins. Karen started walking up to trees, slapping neon orange tape around their trunks, then checking boxes on her clipboard with dramatic pen flourishes. When she saw us watching her, she raised her voice as if narrating to an audience. These trees are unstable. Fire hazard. You're in violation of Environmental Safety Code. I'll be submitting this report to the community board. I stood up slowly. There is no community board. This is private land. She barely glanced at me. We'll see what the sheriff has to say about that. Connor tilted his head. So your plan is to call the sheriff on us for cutting firewood on our land, while you walk around with a chainsaw and vandalize healthy trees? Karen ignored him and continued her tree-tagging spree, eventually walking right into our camp and marking the tree that shaded our tent. Then, in what had to be the most baffling escalation yet, she walked over to our campfire, reached into a cloth tote bag slung across her shoulder, and pulled out a full bag of powdered cement. "What are you doing?" I asked, but it was too late. She dumped the cement directly into our fire pit like some kind of deranged witch casting a curse. The flames hissed and sputtered, then snuffed out in a puff of gray smoke. There. Fire neutralized. "You're welcome," she said smugly, dusting her hands off. Connor stared at her, wide-eyed. Did she just concrete our fire? I walked over and pointed to the sign we'd posted on a tree nearby. The laminated notice from the county records office, proving our ownership and the legal right to camp, build fires, even put up small structures. Karen squinted at it, then turned to me with a crooked smile. "Forgery," she said, tapping her temple like she was revealing a grand conspiracy. "Nice try, but I've seen better Photoshop jobs on Etsy." Before I could respond, she turned, revved the chainsaw one last time for dramatic effect, and stomped off back into the woods, her little dog yapping like a backup singer for her rage. I let out a long breath and looked at the ruined fire pit. Cemented over. Unusable. Later that afternoon, we came back from a short hike and found the tent slashed in 3 places. Not animal scratches, straight, angry knife slashes. Our cooler had been turned over, ice melted and food strewn across the dirt. And to top it off, someone had taken bites out of 3 marshmallows and placed them carefully back in the bag like some kind of sugar-soaked calling card. "I think she left us a snack," Connor muttered, holding up a note that had been pinned to the folding chair with a butter knife. The note, written in suspiciously elegant cursive, read, "Nature deserves better. Go ruin a parking lot instead." We stood there in silence for a moment. The peaceful forest escape we'd envisioned had officially been hijacked by a rogue HOA warrior with too much free time and no understanding of property law. I wasn't sure whether to be angry or impressed by her creativity. But either way, it was time to fight back with facts. That evening, I called my cousin Nate, a land surveyor and part-time real estate attorney who, luckily, lived just an hour away. He was one of those guys who thrived on petty conflict, especially when it involved proving people wrong using documents and legal codes. When I told him what had happened, he laughed for 2 full minutes, then told me he'd be there first thing in the morning. True to his word, Nate arrived in a beat-up truck with his measuring equipment, a box of donuts, and a briefcase full of land records. He was already wearing mirrored sunglasses and grinning like a man who just found out someone parked in his reserved spot. "Let's ruin her day," he said, biting into a jelly donut. We walked the entire perimeter of the property, marking boundary points, double-checking coordinate. Not only did our documents hold up, but Nate also discovered something wild. Karen's property line didn't even reach the edge of the forest. Her cabin, which she claimed as bordering the community preserve, was actually sitting 15 feet into our parcel. In other words, Karen wasn't just harassing us. She was technically trespassing every day she stepped outside her porch. Connor nearly dropped his water bottle laughing. "She's been yelling at us for camping while literally living on land she doesn't own?" Nate nodded. "Oh yeah. And I'm emailing you both the official survey map, the deed, and a drafted cease and desist. Let her call the sheriff now." We printed everything out, laminated it, and nailed it to a tree at the edge of the clearing, just in case she returned. And boy did she. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees and we tried to rebuild our fire using a backup pit, Karen came creeping back. This time without the chainsaw. She just stood at the edge of the clearing, arms crossed, dog quiet, her face unreadable. Then she saw the new sign. Her eyes scanned it, her lips twitched, and for the first time, she said nothing. She turned slowly and walked back the way she came, her pace slower, her shoulders tighter. Something told me she finally realized she might have picked the wrong forest to mess with. Connor exhaled and said, "I think the forest ghost has been exorcised." I wasn't so sure. Karen didn't strike me as someone who gave up after round 1. This was a woman who poured cement into someone else's fire pit. She was the kind of person who escalated until she either got her way or exploded. And judging by the look on her face, she was nowhere near done exploding. We might have won the legal round, but something told me Karen was about to get real creative. The next morning started with the sound of gravel crunching under tires and the lazy chirp of birds that hadn't yet realized their peaceful forest was now the setting for a full-on human turf war. I was sipping the first mug of coffee from our newly rebuilt fire pit when I heard Connor chuckle and mutter, "She called the cavalry." A dusty white sheriff's SUV rolled into the clearing, slow and deliberate. The door opened, and out stepped a broad-shouldered man in mirrored sunglasses, wide-brim hat, and a badge that glinted in the morning light. Sheriff Daniels. I hadn't seen him in years, not since my grandfather's funeral, but he looked exactly the same, like he'd been carved from oak and dipped in coffee grounds. And right behind him, arms crossed and smugness dialed up to 11, was Karen. She looked like she'd been preparing for this moment all night. fresh lipstick, ironed khakis, and a dog in a matching vest that read,